So we're continuing this theme of immortality today. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about, so we spoke about general immortality, bodily immortality, collective immortality, but we haven't spoken yet, if you remember, about personal immortality. So up until now, and for those of you who, like Bram, who are just joining, you're going to be like, what is going on? But that's fine. We're in the middle of an idea, and hopefully you'll be able to catch on.
Some of us might be saying what's going on too. So Bram, you won't be alone.
So up until now, we explored this mostly corporeal oriented aspect of immortality. What I want to do today is take a look at it on a personal level. So just as the whole of the universe can never be lost, which means the notion of extinction, the notion of total annihilation is scientifically and logically impossible. As matter can't fall out of the universe, and energy, which is a condensed form of matter, is continuously being recycled. The same is true of the human. The same is true of us. Just as the amount of energy in the universe never changes, the same is true with the energy of the human being. The amount of energy, the amount of human in the universe never changes. As something cannot become a nothing. This is a basic principle within science, but also a basic principle within Kabbalah, that something cannot become a nothing. And someone cannot become a no one. The moment you're a someone, you will be a someone forever. So what's left to be explored is the various degrees of immortality, the various degrees of immortality that are experienced by the divergent energies of the soul, or we'll say the divergent energies of souls. So when we looked at the Talmudic and the philosophical and the mystical views regarding the nature of the soul, we said that we observed that to some degree, at least on the lower levels of the soul, if you remember our deep dive into the 5 levels of the soul, so on the lower levels of the soul, they're all portraying the same reality in different terms. Each is anchored in their own particular genre or level. Overall, there's fundamentally 2 classifications when it comes to souls. There's the ego, or we can call that the vegetative, or we can call that the animal on one hand, and we can call the good or rational or transcendent on the other. So we have the ego, animal, vegetative, which is basically this world. And then we have the good, the rational, the transcendent, which is maybe beyond this world. So the first set, the ego animal set, is physically oriented. It's not only physically oriented, its principal function is to serve the body. That's the point of it. To persevere, to sustain the physical existence. This is the aspect of the soul that needs the body. I mean, imagine the vegetative or animal soul without a body. It's not going to really be very much of a vegetative or animal soul. Or maybe today we would call that the reptilian brain. So that part, or that set of the soul, is a very physical part of the soul. The second set, which we're going to call the good or the transcendent part, it allows us to climb upwards. It allows us to reach that which is beyond, that which is deep within us. The soul exists independent of physical form. And I think this is a very important part of this conversation, that the soul itself is not a soul or just a soul that is connected to a body, but it actually exists independent of the body, independent of physical form. So being that the ego or the animal soul, they're all in service of the body, when the body passes, this level of the soul disappears. This level of the soul is most apparent to us. It's most obvious to us. So it may seem on a physical level that the soul is kind of dissipating. But just as the body ceases to exist and it's distinct in its distinct form, but it continues to survive as part of something else, let's say in the recycled form, the same is true with regards to aspects of the soul. So these lower levels of the soul, and this is what we kind of focus on life itself, when they're properly integrated during life, in death, they're going to reappear transformed into a spiritual matter. This is more a form of the collective, actually. It's a non-personal, energetic immortality, not as much of an individual immortality. But now let's go into the next level, and that's absolute eternity. Absolute eternity, both in shape and in form, existing as it does prior to the body's creation and perpetuating long after its demise, can only be experienced through that part of the soul that is beyond the temporal, that is beyond the spatial, that is beyond the physical limitations. See, there's a part of our soul that existed before we were born, and it will exist after we go. And that part of our soul is not part of the physical world. It maybe while we're in this world, there's an element that becomes part of the physical world, but it's beyond the physical world. It's not necessarily directly connected and doesn't depend on the physical world. The word immortal, the idea of immortal, is the non-local aspects of consciousness. Those which are not confined to the nervous system. And they're more than the sum of the material brain or the sum of the material body. Only the rational soul, which was given from heaven, or the divine soul, which itself is part of heaven, can truly experience immortality. Although I will say, for those of you who want a little bit to go beyond, the divine spark is also subdivided holographically into lower and more dense ego, which is the survival-based aspects of the soul, as well as the more transcendent aspects that permeate the whole person. Anyway, different conversation. Only that which emanates from the ethereal and from the celestial realm that precluded the physical reality, sorry about that, can supersede the laws of nature and live for all eternity. So the manner in which the soul experiences immortality in its own idiosyncratic construct as a particularized existence or as an individualized soul that's residing, let's say, in Gan Eden, in paradise, or maybe in another incarnation. This is what we're going to get to at some point, but not now. Right now, the soul is a spark of the infinite. We understand that there's an eternal, there's a godly portion of the soul, an eternal portion of the soul. And the soul not only has a portion that's eternal, it's infinite at its core. And so after the soul leaves the world, after a person passes away, after the physical representation of the soul returns to its source and merges with the oneness of the Creator, as we say in Kabbalah, the only difference is that now, after living in the physical world, after living in the physical plane, the soul has become all the more comprehensive, collecting years worth of human experiences. So we can't say that the soul that came into this world is the same as the soul that leaves this world. Then what was the point of the human experience? The soul that comes into this world is one form of spiritual matter. And the soul that leaves this world is going to be a different form of spiritual matter because of the collective human experiences that it experiences while it's in this world. Prior to the soul descending, its infinite part was very much one-dimensional. Infinite in expression, infinite in experience, but unconnected and precluding anything in the finite. Remember, and we spoke about this before, if you're just infinite, you're not infinite. In order to be infinite, you also have to be finite. Because then if you're just infinite, then you're finite to infinity. That makes sense. Now, the infinitude includes both the infinite and the finite. So it's infinite in its potential, it's infinite in its core, but it's finite in many of its experiences and memory, especially in its collective memory. And this is the personal measure of immortality, where the personal consciousness and identity lives on. This world and the experiences in this world are not for naught. And so the soul, even after this world, will be able to experience something more than this world. Cheryl, please.
Thank you. First, I think we all should be smoking something while you're talking because it's pretty heavy. My question had to do with, okay, going way back in classes, you had told us about levels of the soul, but I thought the levels of the soul were still one soul. What you said a few moments ago sounded like the soul is divided. Correct me if I'm hearing this or understanding this wrong, that it's divided. There's a part that stays with the body, and I know when the physical body dies, that's gone, and then that soul kind of we talked about moving closer to the Creator and all about Kaddish, but it sounded more like the different levels of the soul were all integrated into one in the body, and then do they splinter? That's the part I'm getting lost. Okay. Do we have more than one soul?
So there's one soul, and I think it's good to clarify. What we're talking about is immortality. We're not connecting it necessarily to the 5 levels of the soul. We're talking about immortality. In the world of immortality, there's parts of the soul that are immortal and parts of the soul that die with the body. So those parts, like, for example, let's go into the 5 levels of the soul. The first 2 levels of the soul that we spoke about that are totally connected to the body, they will die with the body.
Ah, okay. I didn't think any of the soul died with the body. I just remember the image on the very first night of this class of playing the piano and listening to the tune in your head and what's making the piano play and the division of personality or spirit
Right.
and the physical hands.
But
So I
now,
have that memory.
but
And then I thought when the person dies, when the person dies, then that goes, ashes to ashes, and then the soul elevates back to the
there
creator.
is a collective experience, but there's parts of that experience that are going to get cleansed, and they won't be there. They're not eternal. Look, I mean, Cheryl, I think we can all agree there's parts of our lives that we want to keep here in this world, that we don't want to be eternal, that we don't want to be immortal. Certain experience, certain things that we did or do, that we don't want to take with us and have with us forever. Traumas. I mean, we don't have to go into all the details, but you can imagine there's a lot of things. So those things through that process of cleansing, some of them even immediately at death, and then if not, then through the process of cleansing with the 11 months or 12 months, and then the Kaddish and all of those elements, they go. So what we have here today is the advantage of the deep dive. So if we were only doing, when we first started, a little 6-session introduction to the afterlife, then we wouldn't go into this detail. But now we have what we're going to call an individual immortality detail. That there's parts of the soul that don't come with us.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, good. So now,
one in the chat.
yes, which soul gets recycled and returns to the other form? So basically two in the middle level of the soul, parts of it, but mostly the upper 2 levels of the soul are the ones that get recycled. So the ego element of the soul is not getting recycled. Julian, and this is where the work comes in this world. The only way for us to recycle it is during our life. We can only refine our ego in this world. After this world, we don't have the ability to become more refined person in connection to this world.